I think it's fair to say that gaming isn't going to be getting any cheaper.
Not the leader of a cult, rabbit with axe.
Greetings, demons, and welcome to a discussion video about the Steam Machine, Valve's newest piece of hardware, and we have, amongst a lot of other things, the official price for the Steam Machine, and all variants, all models that are going to be released at launch at least. There may be others in the future, of course, but for right now, we have 4 to discuss. And I'm going to jump straight into the main topic of, what everyone's been talking about essentially, and that is the actual price. And of course, I'm in the UK, I'll be talking in Great British Pounds. If you want to know the US prices, just look it up. I'll be referring to everything in Great British Pounds. It makes it sound better, makes me feel a bit happier because, oh boy, these prices. But yeah, the Steam Machine will be starting at £879, and that is for the 512GB model without a controller. Adding a controller takes it up to £938, which is not that ridiculous in the grand scheme of things, but is still far more than I think is necessary for something that, for a traditional console, is a standard, is a default. If I buy a pre-owned console, then maybe I won't get a controller, and I kind of get that because I'm getting a used console. A brand new console not coming with a controller by default is insane to me, especially at this price point. So $879 for the 512 without controller, $838 with controller, and then we move up to the 2TB model. Now bear in mind, the only major difference, the only real notable difference between the 512GB model and the 2TB model is that storage size. That takes it from £879 to £1,149 for 2TB of storage. And we'll get into comparisons in a moment when it comes to, other consoles that are currently on the market. But just keep in mind, $879 to $1,149 for an increase of just under 1.5TB of storage. That is ridiculous. And then go up to $1,208 if you want to add a controller, because yes, the 2TB at $1,149 doesn't include a controller. And I will quickly just mention, because I know people will be thinking it, and people may have mentioned in the comments, yes, with the Steam Machine, you can use pretty much any controller, any keyboard and mouse setup, any peripheral you can imagine really that works on modern machines. You can use it. The Steam Machine is still a PC at its core, and you can use essentially any accessory you want. Whether that's audio, whether that's control, whether that's anything you can imagine. Yes, it should, in theory at least, be fully compatible with whatever you want. So, if you're like me and, own a Series X controller and a PS5 controller and any number of other controllers, yes, you can just use those on the Steam Machine. However, the Steam Machine is intended to be a console. It's Valve's console, their living room setup console, their couch play console. I know I'm repeating that a lot, but the fact that we have a console releasing without a controller by default is just insane to me. But moving on from the price as, a specific point of reference, let's just do a few little comparisons between the other consoles on the market right now, and just kind of put in perspective what we're actually looking at here. So, as I say, minimum £879, maximum £1,208 with a controller with a 2TB. Okay, let's look at Xbox for a moment, and bear in mind, once again, all UK prices, Great British Pound prices that are available right now as of recording this video on the 23rd of June 2026. All this is going to change. I know there's going to be price rises, all that kind of stuff. Don't come at me about this. We have the Xbox Series S, the cheapest console, and I will be talking about the most expensive variant of each console, just to make that clear. The Xbox Series S 1TB version is $349.99. So, better than half the price with double the storage, and fair enough, It is the digital version, of course, it is the all-digital console, but so is a Steam machine. That isn't really a comparison point that I think makes any sense to make here. The Series S is weaker by a good margin than what the Steam machine is reported to be. However, that price reduction, I'd say, is worth it based on what we've seen of what the Steam machine is worth in terms of its actual output, in terms of how well it can run games. Moving on, though, to the Xbox Series X, and once again, I'll be talking about the top-tier version, the 2TB, the Galaxy Black version, $589.99. Now, I'm not going to say that the Steam machine is equivalent to an Xbox Series X. I think the Xbox Series X is weaker because, unfortunately, this generation, Xbox has been the weaker, well, brand. But at the same time, 2TB of storage for less than the price of 512GB of storage with the Steam machine. And once again, I don't think the Steam machine runs games well enough to make up for that price difference. The Xbox Series X, I personally think, is a bit overpriced. It is still considerably cheaper than the Steam machine. And that is ridiculous in and of itself. But of course, there's the true comparison here of the PlayStation 5. The base PlayStation 5, 1TB, so still more storage, $569.99. So actually even cheaper than the Series X, which is very funny to me. And the PS5 base model, the non-Pro version, the standard PS5, that is the most comparable console that we currently have on the market to the Steam machine. So how is it that with an extra 500-ish gigabytes of storage, it is pretty much £300 cheaper? How does that work out? These are comparable machines. There is very little differentiating how they will run most games. And sure, the Steam machine does have some slightly newer tech behind it. It will have some little tricks to get slightly better performance in some games, but that is not representative of the full library that you'll be having either on Steam or with a PS5 on the PlayStation Marketplace. This is a crazy comparison just because they are so comparable in terms of spec. And it gets even more ridiculous when you take into consideration the PlayStation 5 Pro 2TB, so once again, we've got the 2TB storage capacity, is $789.99. Still cheaper than the 512GB, and considerably more powerful. I really want to drive that home, that I'm not making these comparisons purely because, oh, the Steam machine's expensive, which it is, but so are all these other consoles that I'm mentioning. It's the fact that the Steam machine is expensive compared to equivalent technology, equivalent consoles, equivalent releases, equivalent hardware. You cannot tell me that a PlayStation 5 Pro is at a lower price than the Steam machine, not better value. Despite the fact that the PlayStation 5 Pro is ridiculous, and up until the Steam machine, was the most expensive console of all time at its list price. That is ridiculous to me, and yeah, it is an awful comparison to make because of the fact that the Steam machine is the new one. It's the one that should, in theory, be the most powerful on the market. It should have this, that, and the other over the PlayStation 5. But not only is it only just comparable to a base model PS5, it's considerably, well, not considerably necessarily, but it is a decent way more expensive than the Pro model. And that, to me, is just insane. And before we get into the final major competitor for the console market, I just want to quickly bring in the prices currently for the Steam Deck. So, of course, we have the OLED, that 512GB model. See, that number comes back again. And the OLED 1TB model. So neither of these have a 2TB variant, but once again focusing on the more expensive of the two, we have the 1TB OLED for £779. So this is in fact cheaper than the Steam machine. However, it's a portable console. It is less powerful than the Steam machine. And when you put it into that sort of perspective, all of a sudden, the Steam machine looks pretty good value. However, we still have Nintendo to mention. And right now, you can get two different versions of Nintendo's hardware. The Nintendo Switch Lite, the last generation console, and the Nintendo Switch 2. Starting with the Nintendo Switch Lite because it is, by and large, the weakest console I'm mentioning right now. It is $199.99. It is the cheapest, it is the weakest, and it is the least versatile in pretty much every regard. But I think overall, what the Nintendo Switch Lite actually provides is a really good, solid gaming experience that, depending on the game you're playing, can actually be comparable to the Steam Deck, which puts into perspective how expensive the Steam Deck is, as well as the Steam machine. But looking at the Switch 2, the actual direct comparison right now, the Nintendo Switch 2 is $395.99. Bear in mind, that is without a game. So that is without Mario Kart World, or Pokemon Legends Zeta A, or Pokemon Pokopia, or any of the other random bundles that are currently available on the market. Base, Switch 2, no game, $395.99. Not only is the Switch 2 comparable, if not considerably more powerful in some regards, than the Steam Deck, it is half the price of the Steam Deck. And the reason I'm bringing this up is purely on the basis of the Steam machine is only good value compared to what is arguably the next worst value console on the market in terms of the big names. I'm not going to bring up any of the Neos and stuff like that, mostly because I'm not very knowledgeable on them, but also because it becomes a bit of a ridiculous conversation to bring in multiple other companies. Keeping it to the main three and Valve makes a lot more sense to me. But this is a ridiculous comparison to be making. $395.99 for the Nintendo Switch 2. Not only is the Nintendo Switch 2 a home console that is also a portable console, but it also has a ridiculous amount of exclusives. Something that many people have pointed to SteamOS as also having. The Steam machine has a lot of exclusives just down to the fact it is a PC, running PC games. The Switch 2 has a massive exclusive library, as does the PS5, but to a lesser extent arguably. The Switch 2 is honestly, even after the price raise, great value. And the fact that it is half the price of the Steam machine at its lowest capacity, and is only just over half the price of the Steam Deck, I think Valve, at least for their first generation of hardware, if you want to call this their first generation at least, has really failed in terms of making affordable hardware. And it's really disappointing to see. But with all those comparisons out of the way, let's move on from the pricing and the overall power level and just kind of talk about my general feelings around the Steam machine. So to start off this section, I just want to say that I am not by any means against the idea of Valve having its own console. I am actually a really big fan of the concept. I missed out on the original Steam machines back when they were actually a thing, but I did end up getting a Steam Link later down the line, which, if you're not familiar, a Steam Link is essentially a streaming box for an existing PC, so I actually do play a decent amount of SteamOS games over on my TV right now, because I have the Steam Link set up. It's a decent console. I quite like SteamOS, and despite the fact that, personally, for me, due to budgetary reasons more than anything, the Steam Deck and now the Steam machine have not been really ideal for me, I love the idea of a SteamOS machine. Something that can play on my PC games, which nowadays is where most of my library lives, and actually be able to experience it properly from the living room, without having to mess around with ridiculous cables or latency from streaming or anything like that. The idea of actual dedicated Steam hardware is actually really attractive to me. And when it comes to the actual design of the Steam machine, I think this thing is awesome. A lot of people have actually been calling it the GameCube, which I know is a throwback to the early days of Steam machines, and obviously a riff on GameCube, and I think it really does work for something like this, and I almost kind of wish they went with that as the name. Obviously they're not wanting to connect too strongly to Gabe Newell in terms of the branding, but I do think that would be a really cool thing for them to have gone with, of instead of calling it the Steam machine again, sort of thing, just call it the Gabe Cube, or some other little punny sort of name that is referential to the community that Valve has built over the years. And yeah, overall, I think the design is really good. The ports, while nothing spectacular, are about equivalent to any other console on the market and, you know, are better than something like the Xbox Series S or the Switch 2. It is actually a decent selection. And overall, like, the aesthetic, the black cube, while simple, it has that same sort of fits anywhere, fits in any space that we saw from the Xbox Series line of consoles. And while I know plenty of people are very well into the PS5 sort of design philosophy of make it stand out, make it look like, you know, a piece of furniture or a piece of decoration or whatever, I personally am of the belief that the best way to have a media box of any kind is for it to kind of blend in and not stand out and just kind of exist. That, of course, does kind of go against the idea that it does have a massive light bar. It wouldn't be a PC without RGB, would it? And that is the one thing that I think is a little questionable. I like the idea of it, and to be fair, other consoles have had that over the years where there is a light function. I don't hate it, I don't dislike it at all really, but I will say it does kind of break up the design in a way that I'm not personally a fan of. As much as it sounds boring, I would kind of preferred if the front of the console was actually solid rather than having that little slit in it. But that's just preference. I'm sure plenty of people are going to disagree with me on that one, and at the end of the day, I still think this overall looks really, really good. And the last thing that I just want to kind of touch on, because I think it is worth pointing out, because this is actually a pretty decent thing from Valve, and that is that the pre-orders are going to be a lottery system, which I think is really good for preventing scalpers. It does mean that there are extra checks and balances into who will actually get them, you know, at launch. And it also means that they are able to predict better how many consoles they actually have to produce. It is good when Valve or any company do this sort of lottery system, in my opinion. It's just a shame that with the prices as they are, it's kind of null and void. I'm not going to be signing up for the waiting list because it's too expensive. And it's simple as that. And that is really my takeaway from the entire experience here. But on that note, that's going to be it for this video on my thoughts on the Steam machine. So I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like the video, subscribe if you're new to it, and ring the bell so you don't miss a load of a couple of your thoughts and feelings on the Steam machine, as well as other Steam products, Steam Deck, the Steam Frame, anything that you want to really talk about when it comes to Valve's hardware. And yeah, otherwise it's going to be it from me. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Look at the screen, you'll be fine. Culture's a disease, but we'll survive. I just wanna take